Hi, everyone. Guillaume, thank you for joining us today.
Pleasure. Hello, everyone.
I think we're all interested in hearing your thoughts on a number of topics. Let's start in a very general sense. How are you feeling about where you're seeing the market in terms of demand, production, and just the overall strength right now?
So the market in terms of flights, in terms of traffic, has really recovered compared to 2019. And there's probably more demand than supply for flight tickets. That's why the seats are quite expensive at the moment. It's different for the supply of planes. We're still very far away from where we were in 2019. I like to share a few numbers. In 2019, we delivered 863 planes. 863. Last year, 661. So we're still 200 lower than 2019, and it's challenging to ramp up. And actually, what we see today in this industry is a huge gap between demand and supply. And I think this gap will remain for some time, as it takes a lot of time and a lot of efforts and pain to do the ramp up in the global environment we're in.
How long does that gap remain? Do you think it could close, let's say, by 26, 27?
We think we'll close the gap by 25, 26. But a lot of things are in flux and keep moving, so we have to be prudent when it comes to forecasting the future. But the gap is here to remain, in my perspective.
Is the biggest challenge right now still the supply chain?
Yes.
You and I have talked about this several times at air shows. There was a point where it was very fragile, and you were like, oh, it's very fragile. When we were talking backstage, you mentioned it's improving. What's your assessment of where it is now versus where you would like it to be? Is it about 70% of the way back, 80% of the way back?
I like to come back to 2022. It's the year where we really failed on our ramp-up plans because the state of the supply chain was much worse than what we were expecting. So by end of 2022, beginning of this year, we revised the plans to adapt to the best understanding we could have of the state of supply chain. You might remember that we targeted in 2022 to deliver 720 planes. We delivered 660, as I said, and we target 720 this year. So we have lost 1 year on the way, but we believe the plans that we have for this year and for next year are quite consistent with the shape of the supply chain, and we're on track for 2023. So we have adapted our ambitions to what the supply chain can deliver.
So getting back to my question, are you looking at it and saying it's about 70% of what we think where we need to be?
Well, actually, it is where we need to be this year.
This year, but where you want to be in 25, 26.
The challenge is to find the right pace to make sure that it will still be where we need to be next year and in 25 and 26. And that's probably slower as a ramp up than what we were thinking a year or a year and a half ago.
Let me ask you about this morning. You guys announced a production deal with a company for sustainable aviation fuel. And I know it's not the only one you've done, nor will it be the last one that you do. But how do you feel about where SAF production is right now, not just here in the United States, but worldwide?
So as you know, at Airbus, we are very committed to decarbonization of aviation. There's a big roadmap that has been supported by many players, endorsed by ICAO end of last year. And that comes with planes that can burn less fuel and over time burn 100% of SAF instead of jet fuel. So SAF is absolutely critical to the success of decarbonization, and we start from less than 1%. So at Airbus and with other players, we have started to catalyze, to enable, to help, to support the ecosystem, to accelerate the production and the use of SAF. And we are working around the world with partners, and DG Fuel is one of them, a very promising technology, and we really believe in that company. That's why we have decided to work with them and spend some money together with them to enable production of SAF. And using the example of DG Fuel here in the US, the aim is to produce 500,000 liters of SAF by 2026, and that would reduce the emission of carbon by 1.5 million tons of carbon a year. and that's quite sizable. It's far from where we need to be, but we need to begin somewhere with a number of small projects and then bigger ones. And this is also challenging the big players to accelerate their own investments and their transition from fossil fuel to SAF. And the aim, as the way we see it, is to try to be as close as possible as 10% of use of SAF in this industry by 2030.
Do we get there?
Not yet.
Not yet, but do we by 2030?
Yeah, I think it's credible to believe we will be there, but there's still a lot of projects that we need to identify and to support and to launch, and that's why we at Airbus try to take our share.
I have to ask you, Greg Hayes was up here earlier, and I know you were watching some of what he had to say, and he talked about, look, hydrogen, there's a lot of challenges, there are technological challenges. You're optimistic, though, about hydrogen ultimately being a fuel source for the aircraft engine, right?
Yeah, we strongly believe in hydrogen for different reasons. First, we are using hydrogen, liquid hydrogen on other businesses, mainly in space and launchers, so that's something we think we have some understanding. When we use jet fuel on board a plane, you take carbon from under the surface of the Earth and you put it in the air when you burn the jet fuel in a turbine. With the SAF, you're taking the carbon from the air and then you burn it again and you put it back in the air. We think at a point in time this will no longer be sustainable and no longer be accepted. So we have looked at what are the solutions to put no carbon in the air. And hydrogen proves to be a solution that works. Actually, we strongly believe that we will be ready by 2035 with a hydrogen plane. The technology will be ready, and there are different solutions.
It will be ready.
Yeah. And the bottlenecks are no longer in the technology of the plane, but it is in the regulatory framework to use hydrogen, to store, distribute, certify the hydrogen planes, and probably even more, on the availability of green hydrogen at the airport by 2035 at the right place, right quantity, right price. That's really where the challenge lies. And therefore, we very much welcome what has been done here in the US with IRA, which also supports the acceleration of the emergence of green hydrogen in this country.
Let's talk about the geared turbofan engine, because you've got a number of Airbus planes around the world that are either parked because they are doing the inspection and ultimately will have to do the replacement, or they're on the schedule. And it's altering the schedules for some airlines around the world. Do you still believe in the technology despite this issue?
Yes, we do. The issue that is being managed by Pratt & Whitney at the moment is linked to a quality defect in the production system years ago, and they have to organize this recall campaign to ensure safety. So I am completely backing what Pratt has decided to do, because safety comes first. It has a lot of consequences on the industry, with airplanes being AOGs for quite a lot of time. That's very unfortunate. That's not what we like, but I think we have to face that situation and go through it and support customers as good as we can. So we don't like the situation, but we think that was the right thing to do, given the records or the lack of records on a number of productions years ago at Pratt.
Mobile, Alabama. I was down there the day that you guys announced the beginning of production a number of years ago, and it continues to grow now. It is a major focus of your efforts globally, but also here in the United States, correct?
Yeah, as a company, Airbus has really grown a lot here in the US. We are a US company now. We buy $15 billion a year here in the US. We are manufacturing the A220 in North America, including in Mobile, and the 320. We will soon have 4 final assembly lines for those planes, and by 2026 we will be producing around 30 planes a month in North America and mainly in the US. So that's
a growth
very
engine.
Sizable. Yeah, sure.
A couple of minutes left, and I have a couple of questions I want to touch base on. The first one being the leasing companies. If you go through the orders for you guys and for Boeing, the airlines have been there, especially when it comes to wide bodies, but the leasing companies have been holding back just a little bit. Do you expect them to come to the table for narrow body or for wide body first?
I think first the lessors have been extremely critical to success. And supportive during the pandemic. A lot of planes that were delivered were financed by lessors. So this needs to be recognized. Second, well, the single aisle is probably a safer asset for a lessor than a wide body. That's why we see them very strong on single aisle. They're coming back on wide bodies, but probably not as strong as it was before COVID. We still are in a rather complex situation from the financial economy and the financial perspective. So I think they will be strong on single aisle, probably not as strong on wide bodies in the short term.
Too risky at this point, perhaps?
More risky than single aisle, yes.
In terms of long-haul international travel, we're seeing it start to come back stronger in Asia, and obviously China is the king over there in terms of the traffic. What do you see over the next 5 years? Do you think it continues to grow at the rate that you expect in Asia?
Yeah, it's coming back. There's a big question mark around China. To what extent it will be back to what it was before? To what extent the international tensions, and especially between China and US, will undermine the recovery of the wide-body activity to and from China. So it's not easy to say at what pace, but the rest of the world is very dynamic. So we will be back to the pre-pandemic levels probably next year on the wide bodies. We're already above 2019 levels on the single-aisle business. So it's a long-term growth that we see on wide bodies as well.
How much does the inability to use Russian airspace right now hurt airlines as they're trying to do these long-haul flights?
Well, that's a big deal, actually. The airspace was designed in 1944 through the Chicago Convention, the ICAO Convention, as a force for good for everybody, for humanity. And actually now, post-Ukraine, there are restrictions, and it's no longer a common good. And this has consequences on the competitiveness, and it's no longer a level playing field. Some airlines are flying across Russia, others can't do it, so it creates complexity, and each and every different airline has a different situation to manage.
Relative to when we talked at the Paris Air Show, you were fairly optimistic about economies around the world, and I know it's not a monolith. They're all different at different places. How do you feel right now when you look around the world at the economies?
It's probably more challenging. Things are not moving forward probably as we would have expected, and each and every region has its challenges. But still, for aviation, we're in a growth environment. I believe, depending on the different scenarios we are looking at for the economies around the world, we'll still be in a situation where demand will be significantly higher than supply for us, for the demand of planes. So we are not too much sensitive to the
day-to-day changes in the
different
economies.
scenarios that we are looking at. Obviously, if there is a major downturn and something that looks like COVID, that would be a different thing, but that's not very likely from my perspective.
Guillaume Faury, the CEO of Airbus. Thank you, Guillaume.
Thank you.